Good evening and welcome to The Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5, deep in the bowels of the United Police State of America. Today is May 2nd, 2014, and our President Barack Obama continues his quest to fulfill the mandate placed upon him by the globalist powers who are struggling, and as they have struggled for 100 years or more, to really consolidate their gains and put the entire world under their power, their full spectrum global dominance. And the means they're using to gain that power right at the moment is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that, but suffice it to say that it is touted as a trade deal, but really it's very much more than that. It is actually a transference of power from the ordinary people of various countries, many of the countries involved, to a globalist, transnational power elite. This will give them special privileges to trade and breaks down the barriers of national sovereignty between the countries. And some people feel that we have not really achieved the evolutionary acumen to really appreciate or understand what they're doing for us. Other people realize that it's nothing more than a power grab by money-hungry, power-hungry, greedy moguls, just barbarians at the gates, people who have no respect for human life whatsoever, and indeed really scarcely consider themselves as human beings themselves. Such is the error of their ways that they really believe that they have evolved beyond the point of being humans at all, and that they deserve everything because they're smarter, stronger, more long-lived, healthier, you name it, they think they've got it, and they're completely deluding themselves. Barack Obama is actually running into some difficulties getting everybody on board for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and this is good news. Maybe it will be delayed. The good news, of course, being that many people, more and more people, are waking up and understanding that what is in the interest of the power elite globally is not necessarily in the interest of the individual or of the ordinary people, the common people of the planet who make up by far the vast majority of the people. The power elite really are a very small group, and by some estimates, 0.1% is a very generous number for the people of the planet, actually, who are the power elite. It's a very small group. I've heard numbers like maybe 6,000 souls are members of the power elite, or of those globalists who want to bring in the New World Order. The New World Order being a grid, a globalized grid work of power and control, which gives them special privileges. Now, one way that the elite are trying to get special privileges is by abolishing net neutrality. And I actually have a video today to show you. It's about 18 minutes long, which is a combination of two internet radio shows that or TV shows, I should say. It's the Corbett Report and then Media Monarchy. And the two hosts get together and present the show together. And it's very interesting. And it was only recorded at the end of last month, so it's about a week old, which is really old for the internet. And of course, that's one of the nice things about the internet, is that you get your news fast, really fast, as it happens, and you get it in a lot more detail. And in fact, you have many people on the internet who are broadcasting news, and it's days, months, weeks, or even years in some cases before the news actually breaks in a newspaper like the New York Times or the Washington Post. And that is because oftentimes these stories they sit on these stories, and they simply are not allowed to air them for one reason or another. Maybe the politics are not right. They want the story to be delayed until after the election, or for whatever reason that they have, they delay the stories. The American public really have a right to know what's going on in the world. Certainly the elite do not deprive themselves of breaking news, but it's only the ordinary people who are not supposed to be informed as quickly. This gives the power elite a jump on the ordinary people in the understanding of what's actually going on. And this actually works to their benefit and can be quite profitable to have a jump on the news. Even a matter of seconds, when you consider something like whether or not the stock is going up and down on Wall Street, or milliseconds, really. It comes down to milliseconds. If you have the information a millisecond before your competitor or an ordinary investor, then you can buy or sell and make money, and they can't because they're too late. And they've missed the opportunity, and they don't even know it. And of course, this has all come to light recently, although people who are savvy about this have understood this is the case for a long time. It's the electronic trading that's been going on has been going on for quite a while. But yet, when do we hear about it? Just recently in the mainstream media. So now they're letting you have the information after they've already been doing it for quite a long time. Why are they letting you have the information now and not years ago when they first started doing it? Because they wanted to make that money. They wanted that edge. And probably what happened is they decided that, or somebody was about to blow the whistle, let's say, and break the news, so they decided to just do it themselves, and this gives them the opportunity to spin it and maybe soften the blow and make it less of a scandal than it really is. I mean, this kind of stuff is illegal, really, if you come right down to it. But they're used to getting away with illegal behavior, and they are also used to controlling the blowback so that it doesn't damage them quite as much when their shenanigans are revealed and the light of truth is shown on their crimes. This is how they avoid paying the price. But there is also a culture that people who are rich do not need to pay the penalty. They're exempt for one reason or the other. And we've seen this all the way up and down through our justice system. Those who are poor go to jail. Those who have money get some kind of alternative punishment, which is not as severe as jail. They're considered, people who have from the upper middle class, let's say, or the upper class, are not considered to be jail material. They don't fit in a jail setting for the most part. Now, you always get a few who are plucked out and sacrificed or thrown under the bus to prove to people that, well, we don't do that. We don't protect our own. See what we did to this baseball player who lied in front of Congress? We really put the screws to him, didn't we? And people go, well, wow, that is amazing. They were actually so devoted to the rule of law that they actually put a beloved baseball star through the ringer for doing something very small about like lying about whether he took drugs when he was playing baseball. Oh my God, these people are amazing. They follow the rule of law to the very letter, and nothing could be further from the truth. This is how they pull the wool over our eyes. This is how they trick us. They're very astute. They have gone to college and gotten PhDs, or they know people or have hired people who've gotten PhDs who understand human psychology and they have learned over a long period how to manipulate. And why should they not do this if they have the opportunity to? They laugh at the ordinary American people, at the gullibility of the American people. And they feel that they deserve to be tricked. They deserve to be made dupes. They deserve to be exploited. And what's the old saying? If God did not make them sheep, or if God did not want them sheared, then he would not have made them sheep. And this is their attitude, often. There's something about getting $1 million or $1 billion in your bank account that changes your attitude towards everyone else and makes you feel that you are better than they are, that you deserve better treatment for whatever you do. And I'm not talking about just now, but I'm talking about really all the way through human history. This is the way it's been. I've been reading a book about English history, and the crimes of the monarchy is just beyond the pale. I mean, the royals in British history and the history of the United Kingdom, and indeed, all the way through history. If a murder needs to be committed, or a mass murder, or torture, or whatever, they will not hesitate if it will allow them to maintain or control or increase their control and power. They will not hesitate a second. And they're admired for this. And this puts them, and they can do this. Why can they do this? Because they are above the law. And our modern leaders are no different. And one thing we'll be seeing in this little clip that I have, this 18-minute interview, they will be talking about the ability that the American presidency has given itself, essentially, the ability to kill whomever it wants or to torture whomever it wants without due process at all. And this is now American law. That's the way it stands. They could kill you, they could kill me if they want to. All they have to do is just say, do it, and it will be done. So let's watch this 18-minute, very interesting and informative video. If we're all ready to go, I'm ready, and let's go.
Welcome back to the New World Next Week. I'm James Corbett of CorbettReport.com.
And I'm James Evan Pilato of MediaMonarchy.com, reminding you, as always, you can check out NewWorldNextWeek.com for everything you need related to this show that you're watching, episode 191 of the New World Next Week. James, we'll begin with a story we've touched on all throughout the life of New World Next Week, and it's something we want to keep the audience and ourselves up to date with. and that is the constant moving of the goalposts, the constant lying and obfuscation, and folks just asking for a justification. Federal judges order Obama to release memo justifying assassinations of Americans. This coming from the always informative allgov.com. The Obama administration has been ordered by a panel of federal judges to release its legal justification for assassinating Americans suspected of terrorist ties. Critics of the controversial program have sought the legal memo in question since the 2011 killing of Anwar al-Awlaki, a U.S.-born cleric who died in Yemen following a drone strike. The Obama White House has insisted that the government can lawfully assassinate Americans who join up with terrorist organizations. In the case of al-Awlaki, his purported ties to al-Qaeda justified the decision to target the man from New Mexico. But the administration had been unwilling to reveal the legal document that formed the basis for killing al-Awlaki and others like him. This refusal prompted the American Civil Liberties Union, the New York Times, and even two of their reporters, Charlie Savage and Scott Shane, to sue the Obama administration to force the memo's release. James, we've seen this push back and push away time and time again. Can this reach the point of them actually producing the justification?
More to the point, even if they do, how long will that actually stay in the news cycle? How long will Americans even care about it? And I say that not flippantly. Remember, it was 9 years ago now that John Yoo was questioned by Doug Castle. If the president deems that he's got to torture somebody, including by crushing the testicles of the person's child, there is no law that can stop him. To which John Yoo says, no treaty. And Doug Castle says, also no law by Congress. This is what you wrote in the August 2002 memo. And John Yoo said, I think it depends on why the president thinks he needs to do that. Which is one of the most disgusting things that has ever been propounded by any sort of legal counsel for the White House imaginable, or any government administration. The idea that that could be justifiable depending on what's necessary. And that, as unbelievable as that exchange is, it's there in not only in black and white, there's actual audio recording of it. You can go and listen to John Yoo saying this. And what has resulted from that? Hardly anyone even knows that John Yoo ever said that. The few people that do and follow him around and continue to protest him, as they should, have largely been sort of drowned out of the debate. I mean, yeah, they've followed him around, they've protested him at various events, but that's about it. And what did that change about U.S. policy? Well, pretty much nothing. It contributed nothing whatsoever. So even if they come out with the legal counsel that says, yep, president can kill anyone he wants, including Americans, anytime, anywhere, that's the law, because, you know, if he deems it necessary, it won't be significantly different from the idea of torturing someone's children in order to, you know, stop a terrorist attack or whatever ridiculous scenario they come up with. And that resulted in nothing. So I'm going to say, yeah, they might come out with it, and I don't think it'll result in anything.
Well, and I think even what you're referring to there is some sort of mythical 24 TV show like terrorist scenario where we've just got to, you know, kill someone's child to get information. James, John Yoo wasn't in my show notes. We didn't talk about this pre-show. And even as you mentioned his name, it came flooding back to me. I'd forgotten about John Yoo. And that's not 9 years ago?
December 1st, 2005.
That's under the other guy. So I think your point is well made. The other relateds will include here briefly, as our good friend Brock West notes, life's good if you're a drone-loving criminal regime, as U.S. drone strikes continue with impunity in Afghanistan without facing any international action despite Washington's planned withdrawal from the war-stricken country. Meanwhile, in Spain, makers say don't worry about privacy as the civilian drone industry takes off in sunny Spain. That via Global Post. But James, having said that, we'll move to our second story this week, which I think will be the larger one, which perhaps unlike the forgotten drone killers, I think this will be the story that folks really will be talking about because it'll affect the very way you're hearing us talk about this. FCC finally announces new rules that will kill net neutrality. This from Boing Boing, noting that the Wall Street Journal was the first to report that the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, will propose new internet rules today, that's April 24th, 2014, that will allow content companies to pay internet service providers for special access to consumers. Under the new rules, service providers may not block or discriminate against specific websites, but they can charge certain sites or services for preferential traffic treatment if the ISP's discrimination is, quote-unquote, commercially reasonable. Bye-bye net neutrality and the internet as we know it. Hello, greater connectivity gap between rich and poor in America. Boing Boing helpfully points out, for what it's worth, the FCC's current chairman, Tom Wheeler, previously worked as a venture capitalist and a lobbyist for the aforementioned cable and wireless industry. Even the New York Times writes the new rules, according to the people briefed on them, will allow a company like Comcast or Verizon to negotiate separately with each content company, Netflix, Amazon, Disney, Google, and charge different companies different amounts for priority service. That, of course, could increase costs for content companies, which would then have an incentive to pass on those costs to consumers as part of their subscription prices. Netflix just announced a couple of days ago they're going to up their streaming rates. Proponents of net neutrality have feared that such a framework would empower large, wealthy companies and prevent small startups, which might otherwise become the next Twitter or Facebook, for example, from getting any traction in the marketplace. James, the other way to look at this is possibly Internet 2 that we've talked about for a long, long time. So even CNN calls it the Internet fast lane. Big companies may soon be able to pay to have their websites load faster. James.
Well, it's important to differentiate between what's the internet infrastructure and what the ISPs, the internet service providers, are doing. And this is an ISP policy that they can choose to implement, I guess, under these new guidelines or whatever. I think the underlying principle of this is everyone is for net neutrality except for the big multi-billion-dollar corporations and the internet giants that will benefit from being able to pay to get their stuff piped through faster. So the vast majority, 99% of the internet population, is for net neutrality. So who should we be relying on to enforce that, to make sure that happens? Should it be the FCC that is admittedly and undeniably in bed with these corporations that lobby it to the tune of untold millions of dollars behind the scenes every year to try to get these net neutrality laws stricken down? The principle here is that if you give the government the power to regulate the internet in terms of ISPs have to do these arbitrary things, or they can't do these arbitrary things, or they can do these things in certain situations, then you've just ceded the game to these big corporations that own the FCC. How much input do you or I have over what the FCC decides to do, or the government regulatory agency of any country that we might happen to be living in? Pretty much zero. I mean, we have zero say in this. The corporations have a much bigger say. So should we leave it to the government to decide this? Of course not. What are the alternatives? If in the outcome of this, your ISP says, look, we're going to start giving preferential treatment to Disney because they pay us extra money, or whatever it is, Netflix or Google, and you continue to purchase your internet subscription from that ISP, then you are literally paying for this destruction of net neutrality. You are literally giving juice to these big corporations to do what they're doing. So the only thing that we can really actually do, the only thing we can actually accomplish is vote with our dollars. And it always comes back to this. We can choose not to get an ISP that will violate net neutrality. We can choose to support an ISP that will support net neutrality. If there is no ISP that supports net neutrality, it does not, again, mean that we're hopeless, helpless people that need the government to come along and create one. There are alternatives, and we've talked about it. I've talked about it on CorbettReport.com, the Solutions episode on Pirate Internet. We'll link to it in the show notes. There are technological ways that we can get around these systems, because the internet is not the ISPs. They're not the same thing. The ISPs can choose to do what they want, but the internet itself, the infrastructure, is capable of the net neutrality that we all want. So if it doesn't happen, the fault is not in the stars, it's not in the government, it's not in whatever puppets in power, it's in ourselves. We choose what happens, we vote with our dollars, and we either make the technological alternatives or we don't. We cede the game to the corporations. The choice is ours.
Well said, my friend. The one related I'll add to this second segment is a story I find really interesting. It's ongoing, and it's something I wanted to note a few weeks ago. And Ben Swan has covered the story and calls it cronyism at its finest, as the U.S. government arguing against Aereo on behalf of broadcasters before the Supreme Court. I'll just give you the brief intro because it's a big, fascinating story that, as everything we cover on this show, we'll give you the links. You go do more research for yourself. The United States Supreme Court has begun hearing arguments over whether or not streaming company Aereo can continue to share broadcast content with customers without paying a fee to those broadcasters. The case is American Broadcasting Companies Incorporated versus Aereo Incorporated, which is funded by Barry Diller, who is no small player in the broadcast game anyway. So again, I implore you to go check that out. As we move, James, to our third and final segment this week, and perhaps we could even call it another segment of good news. Hashtag MyNYPD attracts photos of police violence and abuse. When the NYPD's Twitter account asked people just a few days ago to tweet photos of their interactions with the New York Police Department and tag them hashtag MyNYPD, the outcome was pretty predictable. People who feel that the NYPD stands for unchecked brutality, mass-scale stop-and-frisk racism, and the violent defense of the ultra-rich, combined with the official impunity, flooded the tag with photos of NYPD violence, and we will provide some of those links for you. As DigiStrategist notes on Twitter, the folks behind hashtag MyNYPD are learning the tough lesson right now, and I think we kind of see this with a lot of corporations who think people are just going to line up to sort of kiss their feet and kiss their butts and talk about how much we love their corporate crap. So there are some pretty brutal photos and things that have been tweeted back out using hashtag MyNYPD. But I think, James, it's another fascinating case of people kind of turning the tables on these sort of ham-fisted publicity stunts.
It certainly is, and I think you're exactly right. It's so bizarre that whoever came up with this thought it would never backfire like this. That would be my first thought if I was in that position in the NYPD. How are people going to actually use this hashtag? And I mean, it's so obvious that people would pick up on that, but at any rate, yeah, it's a good sign that people are not asleep at the switch, and people will shove this back in their face. But I guess this raises an interesting question. It's a kind of a fun story, but it has a serious angle to it. I guess there are the people who say, well, this is how they're going to collect the information on who's against the NYPD, and they can use this as kind of a surveillance tool. And then there's the other people who say, well, screw them, and who cares? We're still going to use this against them because it's the propaganda war. Which side of that line would you come down on?
I think something like this, when it blows up so large, I don't know that the amount of retweets and the amount of coverage the story has gotten would give them any greater insight into folks who don't like them more than they probably already have.
Yeah.
Now, if you extrapolated this out and tried to play it out in other towns and cities, that could turn into a real problem. But in New York City, you have millions and millions and millions and millions of people there.
Right.
So that's
I think that's a good answer, and I think you're right about that. Especially, I mean, yeah, in New York, it's going to be quite a bit different. The calculus is going to be different. But at any rate, yeah, I think it's a beautiful thing. And if there are listeners and viewers out there in the New York area who have their own stories to share or pictures or what have you, and if you feel comfortable sharing it on Twitter, then do so. And people around the world, if that's something that you want to get on board with. But at any rate, I think it is good to shove the propaganda back in their face and show them that people aren't going to go along with it.
So, James, we'll begin to wrap this episode up with the notes of if the hashtag MyNYPD story is a positive news story, we'll include some other positive news stories that I think this first one, James, even speaks to what we were just talking about. General Mills reverses legal terms after controversy. They basically tried to quietly say, you can never sue us for having anything to do with us, whether it's coupons or prizes or emailing us or anything. We are absolved. People found out about it. They immediately capitulated and changed it back. So, other good news stories. Federal judge approves class action case against Ford and IBM for helping South African apartheid. James, you and I were just noting that Barry Soetoro is over in your neighborhood meeting with Shinzo Abe, and the good news out of there, not an unmitigated good news as we note, but it's unlikely to produce any TPP agreements, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Colorado crime rates down 14.6% since legalizing marijuana. open source comes to farms with restriction-free seeds, and Vermont poised to enact some of the toughest U.S. GMO labeling laws yet. And even their governor is proud to say that he's the first one to kind of put this on the books. So, James, those are some of our good news stories. I don't know if you want to comment on any of those before we just also mention some of the other stories that folks have submitted, and you can as well using hashtag New World Next Week. Now, I suppose I'd love the idea of thinking about how that would somehow be subverted against us, but I think that speaks to the fact I hope we know our audience a little better than the NYPD does, and I think a lot of times when they use these sort of publicity stunt hashtag schemes, they almost invariably end up blowing up in their face when they're used purely for propaganda purposes. We're asking it to help inform all of us out there. So hashtag New World Next Week updates, James, from @Futures Calling. Researchers unveil system to start storms and lightning on command. The new controversial light bulb, which is funny 3 words in and of themselves, controversial light bulb listens to conversations and tweets what it hears. And a couple of more notes, James, of fascinating hashtag New World Next Week stories that there are almost too much to get into right now, so I'll just throw it back to you.
Just on that light bulb story, people who have read Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon will know that there was in that story a light bulb that listened to conversations. It was a spy light bulb. And when I read that way back in the day, I thought that was the craziest thing I had ever seen written. It was just such a bizarre concept. And it is actually here now. It's just mind-blowing. Just mind-blowing.
That I did not know that, and I think that maybe sheds light on why this was done, because I know I even had some reactions on Twitter saying, yeah, and the freaks who made this have the gall to call themselves artists. So in a way, it kind of is an art. We'll just have to kind of keep shining a light on it, James.
And so we shall. All right. Well, I hope people are staying tuned to Media Monarchy and all the feeds coming out from your various ventures there for all of this latest news throughout the week. And of course, as always, use hashtag New World Next Week to keep us all up to date on what's happening around the world. And we'll do our best to get to as much of it as we can. And on that note, we'll take it. We'll leave it there. So thank you again for another week of interesting stories.
Thanks so much, man. Take care.
Okay, there you have it. This is one of the shows that you can watch online, the Corbett Report and Media Monarchy. Both those guys are really sharp and with it, and they're funny and entertaining as well. It's just an example of the alternative media available to people, and I really think people should support alternative media. They should watch it. They should listen to it on the radio, watch it on TV, read about it in wherever it's available, because you're going to get a much more in-depth reporting of the news of the day, putting it into historical context. And I really liked the way that they dredged up the old John Yoo scandal, unbelievably horrific, the guy's attitude, and this was the mindset in the George W. Bush administration, and really that is the mindset of the administration of Barack Obama as well. We have to remember that both George Bush and Barack Obama and many presidents before them, they're all handled by essentially the same team. And some of these guys, like Zbigniew Brzezinski, tend to go toward the left, and others, like Scott Scowcroft, what's his first name? I can't think of his first name. Scowcroft. He's a more conservative, but they agree on the essential points. Scowcroft and Brzezinski even wrote a book together in which at the beginning of the book they actually agree. They say that our views agree. And one advises Democrats and one advises Republicans. And at the end of the book, they make a point of saying that the American people really should not be allowed to find out what we're truly up to because they're not ready for it. And what were they truly up to? What were they talking about? They were talking about the reduction of national sovereignty as part of the agenda for the 21st century. And speaking of agendas, well, we ought to talk about a little bit about UN Agenda 24. There's an interesting website called Democrats Against UN Agenda 21.com or .org. But if you type in Democrats Against UN Agenda 21, you'll get a pretty interesting overview by the people who are they're liberal in their views, who they are understanding, they are coming to the realization that the plan for the 21st century under Agenda 21 is being implemented as we speak. And much of the trends that we're seeing people assiduously and enthusiastically following are cooked up by the think tanks, by those Harvard, Princeton grads who understand how human psychology works. They are actually being, those people who are following these trends are actually being manipulated. And they're being pushed in directions they normally would not have gone. Without even knowing it, they're being subconsciously attacked. And really we're all subject to a more and more intense and sophisticated degree of social engineering, which is pushing us and changing history and changing people's minds or pushing them to do certain things, like, for instance, whether they would buy a house or rent an apartment. For a long time, Americans were pushed to buy a house. Don't rent, buy. Why? Because for all these reasons. It's you're just throwing away your money when you're renting. Interest rates are low. It's an equity. I mean, it's an asset that will never go down in value. You will always be able to get your money out if you decide you're going to sell the house. It will always continue to go up in value. And so every effort was made to get Americans and people around in many other countries, Western countries, to buy houses. I can remember talking to a realtor quite a long time ago. I think this was in the late 90s. And she said that the plan is to make buying a house no more complicated than buying a car. And I thought, wow, that just seems a bit bold. That's bold. That's amazing. I thought, well, I guess it's a good thing. But it turned out not to be a good thing, really, because too many people got in over their heads without knowing it. In fact, the brokers were giving out loans without even checking on whether people were lying on their applications. And in fact, indeed, these brokers called these type of loans liar loans. They knew the people were lying, but they didn't care. They did not care. They wanted that fee. It was all about getting the broker fee and making money that way for them. So they got their little piece of the action. They got their cut. And then the banks, they got their cut. And the banks were willing to go along with it because they had almost unlimited access to money to loan people, and access, essentially much of the money that the banks were loaning was created out of thin air anyway. They could loan out money that they didn't have. And that's called fractional reserve banking. And then you get, it's a great deal for them because people are obligated to pay that money back, and they have to pay interest as well. And the interest part of it is kind of the part of the scam, really. That's why they can get interest rates really low. And you would think, well, gosh, how can they make money if their interest rate is only 3%? That's not very much money. Well, maybe, if they're going to run their entire operation on that, no. No. If you create the money out of thin air and you have to pay back the whole amount plus all the interest, that's a lot of money. And then you can use that money to build yourself a giant skyscraper in a major American city, and this is or around the world for that matter. And that's what we see. If you look at the skylines of cities, you will see the huge, beautiful, gorgeous glass and steel skyscrapers built by the banks. And of course, they're not only banks anymore, but because of the changes in the law, they've become high roller casinos where you're actually speculating, you're betting that the prices will go up, the prices will go down, the interest rates will go up, the interest rates will go down. They have it fixed so that they can bet on almost anything. You can even bet that the stock market will go down and you'll still make money because that was the bet. The bet was that the stock market will go down and therefore you make money when it does go down. And in fact, they have a scheme called a pump and dump scheme. And this is just standard, scheme that they use. Pump and dump. What you do is you get a stock, you get control of a stock, and then you pump up artificially the value of that stock. And of course, people get on board. When the stock price goes up, investors will buy that stock, believing that it is doing well and very successful, profits increasing. It may be kind of phony, and it is phony. So you pump it up to a certain level, and then you sell your shares out of it. And in other words, you jerk the rug out from under that company. And then, but before anyone else knows about it, and then immediately the stock prices fall, and you have all your money plus the profits that you have accrued as a result of pumping up the stock, and you got out so you didn't lose, and you leave everyone else holding the bag. Because when they contributed to that, when they bought that stock, that helped to raise the value of that stock as well. And it has nothing to do with reality in any way. Reality being that why does normally in a sane world, why would a company's stock go up? Because their profits have increased. Because a new CEO has come on board with a great track record. Because they made a better product? Possibly? Could that possibly be a reason why a stock would go up? Because they came out with this fabulous car, this whatever it is, great refrigerator that is an innovation and people are going to love it and it works better and saves energy and on and on. But those are very often not the case. That's not why the stock went up, but it's just pumped up artificially. Pump and dump. So this is the game that they play, and they consider it a game. They call themselves players. I'm certainly not making this up. And they live by this game and they die by this game. And it's no wonder that so many bankers are killing themselves these days. In the last couple of months, been like 9 high-profile bankers jumping off buildings and so on, shooting themselves, hanging themselves, whatever. At least that's the way it appears. Some people think, of course, that they're actually being murdered. We don't know why. Maybe they felt guilty and had some remorse and were going to blow the whistle on the crimes that was being committed in their corporate headquarters, their company, their bank, their hedge fund, whatever. But yeah, I mean, this is the way it goes. This is the way it always goes. So we should not be surprised about this. And people say, well, this is the way it's always been. Like that's an excuse not to do anything. But why would we do anything? This is the way it's always been. No. Always it's been that way, but always people have struggled against it. And people need to continue to be aware of it and take the steps to avoid the pitfalls of a lack of knowledge about how the world works and how banking works and how money works and what money is. So many people really do not understand what money is. How there can be, money is created out of nothing. And it is only a symbol of value. It only has value because people believe that it has value. It doesn't have intrinsic value at all. It's only a piece of paper. It's only an entry using X's and zeros in a computer. It's a computer entry. It doesn't exist in the real world. It exists in the virtual world. The new invention, Bitcoin, is an interesting case in which a virtual currency, Bitcoin, is actually backed up by something. And what is it backed up by? It's not backed up by gold, silver, platinum, or any other hard traditional asset which has true value. It actually has value because of its openness, its transparency. This is my understanding of it. I'm certainly not an expert on Bitcoins and why it works. But because everyone is informed of every single transaction, then none of the games that are played with the US dollar and other fiat currencies can really come off, because people are aware of it. People are told about it. People are warned ahead of time. And this makes Bitcoin have a kind of intrinsic value. And it's a new way of thinking about money, using the power of the computer, the tremendous power of the computer to make information accessible, to create a coin which has a strong trust aspect to it. The trust is built in because you know where it is being traded, what is going on with it, every single aspect, every trade between buyer and seller using Bitcoin is very carefully compiled and made accessible to those who are interested in knowing what's going on with Bitcoin. This is another interest and an interesting way of creating value. The video really touched on a number of very interesting points, and one of the points was that the governor of Vermont has taken a strong stand against GMO. The GMO meaning genetically modified organisms. This is a huge issue for America and the world today, because you have very powerful transnational companies who are pushing us to essentially poison ourselves by eating these foods. These are called foods. They call them foods. They appear to be foods. They look like food, but really they're not food. Food is something which is actually helpful. It improves your health. The old saying is, real food is medicine. Real food actually has a medical value. It will help you. It will improve your health. GMO foods have none of those advantages because the genetic engineering has taken the nutritional value and degraded it so much that it has very little nutritional value left. And this is so that other traits could be enhanced. Like, for instance, the GMO salmon. The salmon is bigger than the wild-caught salmon. But because of the genetically introduced aspect of it too, which may not be salmon at all, then it makes it dangerous for a human to eat Just the same way with the soybeans and the corn, in which the Bt bacteria gene, this is on the genetic level. It's not the same as the old-fashioned way of hybridization. Don't let Monsanto and Merck and these people fool you, because they will always tell you, but it's the same hybridization that we've always had. No, it's not the same, because the Bt gene from the bacteria, the Bt bacteria, is an animal. It's an animal gene, and then you have the corn gene, which is a plant gene, or the soy gene, or the beet gene, and all this other long list of other plant genes, plants that have been genetically modified, not in some small way, but fundamentally, on the genetic level, those genes, the animal gene, using a gene gun, has been shot into the plant gene artificially. And it's always there. It's always there. It's not just for that generation, but it's for all time, forever. And this is one of the major fears, of course, about genetically altered foods, is that they will cross the bounds of the fields that they're being planted in and infect the entire range of corn, for instance, around the world. So all of the corn becomes genetically modified. Or the soy, all of the soy becomes genetically modified. Maybe people don't understand that most of the processed foods today are made with genetically modified corn or soy. They're also fed to the animals. The animals eat the soy, so the meat is infected. And then when the human being tries to digest the plant gene with the animal gene inside it, then the body, which tries to digest this, is confused. The body cannot handle, it was never seen this before. In millions of years of evolution, the human body, which is very well adapted to digestion and survival, cannot handle this. And what happens? It gets sick. It starts attacking itself. The genetic material crosses the barrier. The plant's gene crosses over into the bloodstream, into the genetics of the human being, and poisons them. And therefore you have a rise of bizarre diseases that were extremely rare before, but now are becoming more and more common. A long list of amazing, weird diseases, new diseases, things people never seen before. And yet, the mainstream establishment, the medical establishment, refuses to consider that the genetically modified organisms might be the cause. And this is why Americans must understand that they're being poisoned every single day by any food source that comes from a genetically modified source. And almost all of it is been genetically modified. You know, the high fructose corn syrup, the beets for the beet sugar. The beets have been genetically modified, and you need. This is why you need to know where your food is coming from. You need, if possible, you need to know your farmer. You can ask them. You could go to the store and you can get organic food, but even the organics, these giant multi-billion-dollar corporations are fighting against maintaining strict standards of organic food, and they have almost unlimited resources. The leaders of our country and many other countries, not all, are given money into their pockets for their campaign campaigns by these huge corporations, and they fight for these corporations. And a lot of our leaders are really not very smart. They don't understand that their kids, their grandkids, they themselves are being poisoned. Oftentimes, throughout my life, I've seen that the only time a politician will stand up against something or work toward eradicating some problem is if someone in his own family or her own family is affected by it. Let's say, somebody got ALS, somebody's daughter, some politician. They'll stand up in Congress and say, we got to do something about ALS. Why? Because it affects them personally. And I suppose this is just human nature. This is the way that people think. Oh my gosh, I've got to do something about this. This really hit home. And it's sad in a way, though, because you feel that, well, maybe they just don't care. They just don't care. I was hearing on the news the other day about something like a minimum of 200 schoolgirls got kidnapped in Nigeria. It was over 200. And they just vanished. They got kidnapped by these criminals. They went into the school, and I guess they just took them all. And now we're hearing that these girls have been, farmed out. They're sex slaves. They're being used for this. They're being used for that. They're being sold around to different countries. And the people of Nigeria are really angry with their own government for not doing very much to stop this. And, well, guess what, folks? The chances are that the Nigerian government itself is involved in this. They're probably the ones that did it, or their close friends are doing it. They're profiting from this because young girls have a certain value on the market. It's very sad to say. Now, if these girls were white in Nigeria or any other country, we would have heard more about it on the mainstream media. But they don't it would have been all over the news. This would have been so big, but because they were black, we hardly hear anything about it. And it was in Nigeria, and they're black, And is this not an example of racism? We talk, constantly we hear about, oh, this person is racist. And they use it racist. They use it as a smear tactic. But they themselves show very clear and very strong tendency toward racism because of their attitude. And they do not treat white people and black people. The horrible things that happen to them, they're not treated the same. How much more racist could you be than that? And this isn't just something that they're saying. I mean, it's not some joke you made or you're talking to your friends. This is deeds. These are actual lack of action, sitting on their hands while heinous crimes are committed. So that's all there is for today. You enjoy your weekend and sleep well, friends.